Hey y'all, this is Brown at I've Brown, and today we're going to be talking about Eaten Alive, the special edition on DVD. This movie came out in 1976, and it was the second theatrical film to be directed by Tobe Hooper. And the original title for it was, in fact, Death Trap, but they decided to go with Eaten Alive instead. And it was very loosely based on the exploits of alleged serial killer Joe Ball, who apparently killed several wives or girlfriends and fed their dead bodies to his pet alligators, which he in turn had as an attraction at this bar that he owned. And while it was confirmed that he did in fact kill several people, the whole idea of him feeding their dead bodies to his pet alligators was a bit what was oftentimes considered something of an embellishment for his story. And so as time went on, the notion of him feeding these bodies to his pet alligators took on a life of its own, to a point where his story kind of became that of an urban legend, and he was known in some quarters as the Alligator Man, as well as the Butcher of Elmendorf in other quarters, and that's Elmendorf, Texas. And there is a documentary about Joe Ball on this DVD. It's called The Butcher of Elmendorf, The Legend of Joe Ball. And that in itself was a fascinating story, and it definitely made me, curious to check out Elmendorf. I mean, here I am in Texas. I've never been to Elmendorf, so bucket list, right? So anyway, though, that was the, main inspiration for the horror in the movie. This, urban legend of a real life serial killer or alleged serial killer. But as far as the actual movie goes, it's honestly not that good of a movie, at least in my opinion, because um, it's one of those movies that it's on one hand I have to admit that I appreciate how upfront it is about being a straight up grindhouse exploitation film, and that kind of upfront honesty is admirable in some ways. I mean, especially when you're going into a movie or reading a book or something like that. I mean, it's kind of like you read a Richard Lehman novel. You're basically getting into grindhouse exploitation territory with a little bit of literacy. And on the other hand, I mean, you also have movies like, say, Hobo with a Shotgun, which I mean was definitely a send up of the whole exploitation genre. But in that particular case, you had a compelling, lead performance by Rutger Hauer in that particular movie, which definitely elevated, Hobo with a Shotgun into a realm of a good movie. And so, unfortunately, though, Eaten Alive, doesn't have, say, the literacy of a Richard Lehman novel, and nor does it have, a compelling lead performance or a compelling hero, if you will, as played by Rutger Hauer in Hobo with a Shotgun. But I will say though that Neville Brand, as the main character Judd, who is the villain protagonist of the movie, I will say that his performance is compelling in its own way because he does such a good job of playing, a mentally unhinged individual, and then, someone who, goes from merely twitchy and unhinged to batshit crazy when he's killing people. So, I mean, it's a compelling portrayal of madness, but because, he's not a likable individual at all, it's not, he's not someone that we root for. And when you have a good portion of the people who cross his path, being either just, bland and disposable, or just, outright sleazy or, crazy as he is, I mean, it doesn't really give you a lot to, work with in terms of, say, being sympathetic to anyone, or, being on anyone's, side against Judd. So in that regard, I mean, I had a hard time getting invested in the movie, and I do understand that the producers, they tapped Tobe Hooper to direct this movie because his first movie, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was such a lightning in a bottle horror movie. I mean, it was basically a game changer for the whole horror genre, and it had a very distinctive nightmarish atmosphere and a very dark sense of humor and satire of, I guess you could say, the American way of life, as especially the rural American way of life. And they were wanting him to sort of bring that into another horror movie, namely this one. And so at times, there are moments that do harken back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre in terms of, say, the sort of, eerie atmosphere, or say, moments of, Judd's insanity being on screen, as well as, say, maybe the insanity of one or two of the other characters that cross his path. But other than those moments, though, I mean, it really just, comes across as an exploitation movie, or a sleazy grindhouse exploitation movie that just happens to be directed by Tobe Hooper. And apparently, Tobe Hooper didn't even direct all of it. He, depending on who you hear it from, he apparently quit the movie, at a certain point because of, butting heads with the producers. And so one of the other people had to step in and direct the rest of the movie, or the other parts of the movie that Hooper didn't get around to. And that was cinematographer Robert Caramico. And Robert Caramico apparently took over and directed the scenes that Hooper didn't get around to after he quit the movie. So some of the movies directed by Tobe Hooper, and other parts are directed by Robert Caramico. So, but it does have the visual feel of a Tobe Hooper movie, especially in terms of, say, if you compare it to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's just that, because it's firmly set in the realm of, sleazy, grindhouse exploitation, it wasn't something I was able to get invested in, or I wasn't really able to care about any of the characters. So let's go ahead and get into the actual story. But the movie kicks off in a rather nasty way, in that you have a woman named Clara, who is reluctantly working as a prostitute at this brothel in rural Texas. And as the movie starts off, she's servicing this one client named Buck, who is wanting to, shall we say, perform some backdoor action on her. And this is something that's too much for her. And so she screams and tries to fight Buck off, and Buck comes this close to raping her, but Clara makes enough noise to where the proprietor of the place, or I should say the madam of the place, Miss Hattie, comes storming in, demanding to know what's going on. And Clara is breaking down in tears, saying that this creep is trying to do this, that, or the other to her, and she's not going to do this or that or the other, because that's too much. And so, unfortunately for Clara, though, Buck, it turns out, is a regular customer of Miss Hattie's brothel. And so Miss Hattie, apologetically, tells Buck to just, go downstairs and pick any two broads that he wants, and, this one's on her, and just, have a good time. And so after Buck goes, downstairs to have some more fun, Miss Hattie turns to Clara and basically fires her on the spot, because, if she's going to be, pissing off, regular customers, and if she's not willing to, put out for them, then what good is she working at a brothel? And so she fires her and sends her on her way. And as Clara's leaving, one of the workers of the place, a maid, comes up to Clara and asks her if she has any money, and she's only got a couple of bucks. And so this maid kindly gives her some more cash, so at the very least, maybe she can find a place to stay, for a couple of days, like at a hotel or something. And she points her in the direction of this place called the Starlight Hotel, and she tells Clara that it's a bit run down, but it's very cheap, and it's a good, and she might be able to stay there for a day, and come up with a plan to get up on her feet again. And so the maid does tell her, though, to not let the owner of the place, a guy named Judd, warns Clara to not let Judd know that she worked at Miss Hattie's place, that she was a prostitute there, because apparently Judd, has a thing about prostitutes. And so, Clara, thanks her and goes on her way. And she eventually is able to, walk to the place. And it's just as run down as it was described to her. And she also finds out, to her horror, that there is a rather large crocodile in this outdoor, pool that's kind of gated in, right outside the front of the hotel. And, and once she gets inside and rings the bell, that's when she meets Judd. And Judd is, very twitchy and very, grimy looking individual. I mean, he's unkempt, and he looks like he doesn't bathe a lot, and he clearly takes a shine to her, which makes her very uncomfortable. And she puts her name down, he gets her information, and right as he's leading her to an upstairs room, he recognizes her, because it turns out that he, up until recently, was in fact a regular customer at Miss Hattie's place, until he was kicked out for creeping the other girls out. But he recognized Clara because he had seen her there. And so this sends him into a murderous rage, wherein he chases her, back downstairs, and eventually outside, to where he ends up killing her with a pitchfork, and then feeds her, body to his pet crocodile. And shortly after that, this other, group of people, comes to the place, namely this family. Let's see. You have Faye, who's the mother, and you have Roy, who's the father, and then you have Angie, who's their daughter. And so, Faye, is, someone that it was, you get the idea, is in a bit of a unhappy marriage, with Roy, because she's constantly popping pills, she's constantly gaslighting him, and Roy, for his, for himself, I mean, it turns out he's a bit unhinged, himself, in the sense that, he tries to come across as, a confident, all-American, unhusband and everything, but unfortunately, though, when things unexpected happen, unexpected things happen, it basically sends him into a tailspin. And one of the things that happens is their pet dog ends up getting away from them and heading right into the jaws of Judd's pet crocodile, which traumatizes, their daughter Angie. And so, they, head to, the room that Judd had, given them, and, Faye's trying to comfort Angie, and, Roy is just sitting in a chair, sort of, freaking out and talking to himself. And then he starts just acting maniacal and starts, barking at his wife, and then, acting like he wants to kill her. But he can't really bring himself to do anything beyond, say, standing up and reaching for her. And then he starts talking about, how, she should have just, taken her cigarette and put it out in his eye, because, she's just glaring at him while she's smoking. And then he starts, going on about, he starts pretending like, he lost his eye, like he's trying to crawl around on the floor looking for an eye that, never fell out. So yeah, Roy's pretty crazy. And then he gets into his head to, try and get into his wife and child's good graces by, killing the crocodile that killed their dog. And so he goes, downstairs and goes outside to their car and opens up the trunk, and he pulls out a pistol. And when Judd sees what he's doing, he's trying to, calm, Roy down, saying, hey, it was just doing what was in its nature. It didn't mean no harm. I mean, even though it just brutally devoured their dog, I mean, it didn't mean no harm. It was just, being a crocodile, but, Roy doesn't listen to him and just, starts taking pot shots at the crocodile, which is when, Judd, comes at charging at him with a scythe, and, brutally kills him with it, and then feeds his body to the crocodile. So now you've got Faye and Angie upstairs by themselves, and Judd comes up to take care of business with them, and he basically is able to incapacitate Faye and get her knocked out to where he's able to tie her to the bed and put tape on her mouth. But Angie, though, is able to escape, and she hides underneath the hotel, and so Judd's realizing that he's going to have to go down there himself at some point. But then some other people turn up. In this case, you have a gentleman named Harvey Wood, who it turns out is Clara's father, and he's joined by his older daughter and Clara's sister. Sorry, give me a sec. Find the names. Libby. Sorry, it took me a bit to find the character names. There's a lot of people to keep track of here, but so Harvey is joined by his daughter, Libby, and they're both looking for Clara. And seeing as how this area was where they were. This was the last area that people said that Clara might be located at. Not the hotel specifically, but just that part of town. And so they show Judd a photo of Clara and ask if he had seen her, but he lies through his teeth and tells them nope, never seen her. And so they initially make plans to stay at the hotel themselves, but instead though they decide to go into town to talk to the police, which is where they meet Sheriff Martin, and to tell him what's going on, and that they're looking for this runaway family member, because it turns out that Harvey is in fact dying, and he and Clara had a falling out, which is why she had run away. And when he found out he was dying, he was wanting to find her and make amends. And so Libby's gone with him for some time, trying to track Clara down. And so when they tell the sheriff about this, he has a hunch that she might have been working at Miss Hattie's brothel, which is something that neither Harvey nor Libby are happy about, but it's a possibility that needs to be checked out. So they go to the brothel, and believe it or not, they're treated rather well there. Miss Hattie kind of goes out of her way to shield them from some of the sleazier parts that are going on, or sleazier things that are going on there. And she's initially thinking that Libby's wanting to work there, or Harvey's wanting to explore a business venture with her, which is kind of why she's being so polite with them. But then the sheriff says, "Hey, Miss Hattie, that's not why they're here." And they tell her that this is, and they show her a picture of Clara, and say, "Hey, this is Clara. Have you seen her? Did she at any point come here to try and work?" And Miss Hattie takes a look at the picture and acts like she's studying it, and then she too lies through her teeth and says she never has seen her before in her life. And she apologizes and basically says, "Well, unfortunately, I can't really help you guys." And so the sheriff takes the two of them out and drives them back to the hotel. And Harvey decides that Harvey's persuaded by his daughter Libby to just go into the hotel and into the room that they have and get some sleep, because he's been running himself ragged, and he's already in poor physical shape, because he's dying. And so the sheriff offers to take Libby into town to a local pub, where they can get something to eat and talk. And so as Harvey is making his way upstairs to his room, he starts hearing stuff. Like on one hand, he thinks he hears a little girl crying out for her mommy, and then he thinks he hears a woman screaming from one of the rooms. But unfortunately, though, um, Judd comes to realize that hey, someone knows that something's wrong, so I gotta kill him too. And so events just kind of spiral out of control to where, I mean, you have this sort of almost comically over the top body count. I mean, it's small in number, but in terms of, say, the killings themselves, I mean, they tend to be over the top in a sense that they come one after the other, and Judd just keeps getting more and more frantic and having to feed more bodies to his pet crocodile, and so yeah, I mean, this particular movie, it's, I will admit that there are moments where it works, a dark comedy, but, and it sort of harkens back to some of the scenes in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre where Leatherface is freaking out, basically wondering why these people keep coming into his house. I mean, you kind of see that more with the commentary, with listening to the commentary tracks for that movie, but that same level of humor is present at times in this movie in here, but I guess mainly because most of the characters are kind of either bland or just out and out sleazy, or just disturbingly hinged themselves. I mean, it's really difficult to care about what happens to them. I mean, you do get some brutal kills. I mean, especially with Judd killing Clara with the pitchfork, or him killing Roy or Harvey with the scythe, and then of course feeding all their bodies to his crocodile. I mean, you do get some brutal kills, and as I mentioned earlier, you do have some good moments where Neville Brand really sells the whole unhinged aspect of his character, but because he's such an unpleasant individual, even though he's the main character, we're not on his side and we're not rooting for him. And I would argue that the only quote unquote likable character may in fact be the sheriff, and he doesn't really do a whole lot in the movie. I mean, yeah, he does try and help Harvey and Libby out to try and find Claire and what have you, but unfortunately, I mean, beyond that, he's not really able to do anything more. But he does come across as a character whose heart is in the right place. And the guy who played him was a guy named Stuart Whitman, who was in the World War II movie The Longest Day. And he comes across as a very likable individual. I mean, the way he plays the sheriff, and he, like I say, he's one of the few characters that is undisputedly on the side of good. But he, beyond trying to help Harvey and Libby try and find their missing family member, I mean, he doesn't do anything that could put him, say, in the heroic category. Like, he doesn't go in guns blazing taking Judd out or anything like that, but he does come across as a decent fella. But beyond that, though, I mean, there's really not much in the way of, say, of a good guy in the movie. I mean, you have Mel Ferrer, who plays the dying father, Harvey, and there are a couple of moments where you feel sorry for him, but there's not a lot of time spent with his character. Like, he's not on screen for a long time for us to fully get, say, immersed in his backstory. Like, we get the idea that he's dying, but maybe if we'd had a little more time with this character, we probably would have been able to sympathize with him more, and basically, I guess you could say, feel the impact of his death, even more than say we did in the movie, because the way it's done in the movie, it's just like he's in the movie for a little bit, he's dying, he wants to make things right with his daughter, and then he gets brutally killed with scythe, courtesy of Judd, and then his body gets fed to a crocodile. And as far as Libby goes, I mean, the actress who played Libby was Kristen Sinclair, and I mean, she does okay in the part, but much like the character of Harvey, I mean, Libby doesn't have a whole lot to do in the movie either. And I mean, we get that, yeah, she's concerned about her missing sister and everything, and she does have some good chemistry with Stuart Whitman as the sheriff, but other than that, though, there's not a whole lot to her character, and she just kind of comes across as, say, a pretty face or a pretty body, that might very well soon be in danger of being fed to the crocodile of courtesy of Judd. I will say, though, that if there's anyone in the movie that basically makes the sleaze work in their favor besides Neville Brand, it's Robert Englund as Buck. Now, Buck is a very disgusting individual as a character, but Robert Englund, he does such a good job of playing this sleazy, creep that, it makes you want to punch him. I mean, you dislike the character so much, and Robert Englund does such a good job of getting you to where you want to take Buck out yourself, and needless to say, I mean, he does run afoul of Judd and the crocodile, at some point in the movie himself, and so there is some form of just desserts for his character. So, if there's anything cathartic of, say, any of the characters in the movie, getting killed and or devoured, it's definitely with the character of Buck, simply because of how reprehensible he is as a character. And just the way Robert Englund plays him to grimy perfection. But other than say excuse me, other than say Robert Englund as Buck or Neville Brand as Judd, I mean, none of the other characters really stand out that much. I mean, I will say that the mother and father, the ones who, like, let's see, you have Faye, who's played by Marilyn Burns, who's also in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You get a glimpse of her character, basically just being this gaslighting, unhappily married woman who's constantly popping pills just to I guess you could say stay functional, but and as far as the character of Roy goes, I mean, you have William Finley, who was in Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, and he was awesome in that movie as the Phantom. As brief as his part is, I mean, it was rather weird and kind of creepy to see him go as crazy as he did, because watching the movie, you just see this guy, go batshit crazy out of nowhere and talking about, looking for his eye on the floor, even though he has both eyes. And you're like, what the hell is going on with this guy? So, I mean, it's a disturbing, portrayal of someone just becoming unhinged, just seemingly at the drop of a hat. But you find out a little bit more about the characters in the commentary track, and William Finley himself actually talks about his character, and when he goes into a little more detail, you're like, okay, that makes a little more sense. But still, you watch the movie, you're like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? So I mean, Marilyn Burns, I mean, she did okay with her part. Like, she made it clear that her character was kind of a witch with a B who's constantly gaslighting her husband, and kind of cares for her daughter, or she does care about her daughter, but she's just walking all over her husband, and taking pills to cope with, I guess, the unhappy marriage in general. And William Finley does do a good job of playing this put upon husband who just snaps, but beyond that, though, they just don't really come across as very likable characters. So even though, say, there is an element of danger in the sense that their daughter Angie, being threatened by Judd, I mean, you don't really care about the characters, when things happen to them. And as far as Angie goes, she was played by Kyle Richards, child actress at the time, who was also in the movie Halloween. And I'm not sure if you'd call her portrayal good in the movie, but there are moments where she does, sell, the terror of the situation. I mean, because this is a little kid who's, had some bad stuff happen, with her family and her dog, and she's being hunted by this crazed, unkempt madman underneath the hotel. So I mean, Kyle Richards actually does a good job in some of those moments, but she doesn't really have a whole lot to add and say, the character depth as far as, say, other than those moments of fear. So, I mean, not a bad performance on her part, but just, like the other characters, there's not a whole lot to them. But yeah, so as far as like some of the other stuff, I mean, I will say that, some of the, scenery, because it was all shot on a stage, I mean, it really does have this sort of surreal, quality to look to it, to where it's like, it looks like it's out in the swamps somewhere, but at the same time, because of how isolated everything is, I mean, you feel like you're in this sort of Twilight world. So some of the camera work's good in that regard, or some of the cinematography is good in that regard, because, I mean, there's a grainy look to the film itself, but because of the landscape that we see, is so surreal. I mean, it's a very interesting visual touch. So that does kind of stand out, with the film. And as far as like the actual killings go, like they're almost comically over the top as far as how they occur or how frequently they occur, and kind of like one after the other. And so I mean, it's not that they're bad kills or anything like that, but it's so over the top it's funny, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure if they were going for funny or scary with the kills, but there you go. As far as the actual crocodile, we don't see a whole lot of it. And I think part of that was because behind the scenes they had a hard time, getting the crocodile to work. So, you only see it in action, for a little bit. Like you see its, mouth, its head charging in at someone, its mouth chomping down, things like that. But you don't really see a whole lot of it beyond that. So you could definitely tell things were made on a low budget simply because of how confined the locations were. And also because of how little we actually see the crocodile. But, I mean, even though it wasn't that good of a movie, I mean, it did have some, I guess you could say, interesting, depictions of, madness. And I kind of, I can kind of tell what they were going for in terms of, say, trying to show, say, the dark side of, America, in a sense that you have most of the action taking place in, say, either if it's not this rundown hotel, it's at a seedy brothel, or a bar full of troublemakers. So it's kind of like, I mean, yeah, this is America, but it's a very dark side of America. And of course, with the family, the mother and father and daughter, I mean, on the surface they look like your typical picket fence family, but then when you see just how dysfunctional they are, I appreciate, I guess you could say I kind of appreciated the satire, the dark satire that, of the American way of life and what have you, or the American, family, I guess you could say. So there were moments where I could see what they were going for, but just because of how the characters were depicted, and how little we got to know about them. I mean, it was difficult for me to actually care about what was going on. Besides, being able to appreciate, say Neville Brand, doing a good job playing a madman, and because Neville Brand, it turns out, in real life was a highly decorated World War II veteran, and much like say, much like the real life alleged serial killer Joe Ball. Neville Brand, I mean, he was a war veteran, so both Neville Brand and Joe Ball, who was arguably the basis of the character of Judd, in the sense that you had this, guy feeding people to, this reptilian pet. Joe Ball was a veteran of World War One, and if you watch the documentary about him on the DVD, you find out that World War One really changed him. Well, Neville Brand, served in World War II, and that really changed him. And in fact, when he got into acting, he said that was like the only therapy that was available for someone like him, because at the time they didn't have a lot in the way of therapy for people coming back from the war, or it was very much in its early stages, to where people were trying to help some of the soldiers, but they didn't have the know-how, the mental or medical know-how to do so. So Neville Brand getting into acting, he said that apparently that was something that really helped him, and so it was interesting, with that in mind, seeing moments where Judd is implied to be a veteran of World War II as well, because you see like a Nazi flag in one of his rooms, like in his bedroom, as well as a couple of military rifles, and you get the idea that like he's not a Nazi, but like he took the flag from Germany or something like that, like he fought in Germany. So it was interesting. You have some moments like you get like the barest glimpse of a backstory with Judd, and when Neville Brand's muttering as Judd, and basically talking about both himself and the crocodile, saying we make no distinctions. Like he's talking about himself and the crocodile in terms of say who they kill, and he's just muttering to himself. And you kind of get the idea that may have been something that he picked up, from his time in World War II. And I wish that they had done more with that, because it's like the PTSD aspect is touched upon ever so slightly with moments like that. But beyond that, though, Judd just comes across as a guy who was, batshit crazy, from the get-go. But it would have been interesting if, we had gotten to see, a bit of a backstory as to say how he got like that. And then I guess you could say his mutterings would have made more sense. But instead, I mean, Neville Brand does do a good job of playing this, unhinged, batshit crazy maniac who's running a rundown hotel and killing customers and feeding them to his crocodile, But beyond those brief moments where you can maybe guess about things about, his backstory, it's kind of a one-note performance. Like it's a good job of playing, someone mentally unhinged, but it is a one-note performance in the sense that it's just that, and you don't really see much in this way of depth and substance beyond that insanity. So, as far as the movie goes, I'm going to go ahead and give Eaten Alive 2 out of 5 stars. It was okay. I mean, there were some good moments, or at the very least moments where you could see what they were going for, but unfortunately those either good moments or those interesting moments themselves don't a good movie make, especially when they're few and far between. And also, like I said earlier, or I may have said earlier, this is one of those movies where, say, like the commentary track is far more interesting than the actual movie. And at the very least, after having listened to the commentary track or while listening to the commentary track, there were certain things I was able to appreciate about the movie even more. But because it wasn't until I listened to the commentary track, that didn't necessarily, make me retroactively, you know, change my mind about the movie, being, like going from, say, being a mediocre movie to suddenly being a good movie because of the commentary track. It's just like, okay, with the commentary track, you definitely see what the people were going for, but as far as like just actually watching the movie, it's not that good of a movie. But as far as, say, like the special features, I mean, of course, you have a really good audio commentary track with producer and co-writer Mardi Rustam, and actors Roberta Collins, William Finley, and Kyle Richards, and makeup artist Craig Reardon. And one of the interesting things about this commentary track is it's not that they're all in a room together talking. It's that like some of them are recorded separately and kind of like chiming in at certain points. For example, Roberta Collins, the actress who plays the runaway daughter Clara, she's only in the commentary track for a little bit, and namely just with the scenes involving her character. But you do find out something interesting about like some behind the scenes stuff, in a sense that she and Neville Brand initially were friends, or they became friends, while filming the movie together. And she talks about how fun it was to hang out with him and eat snacks with him and all that. But then one day he invited her over to his place, and well, let's just say that he made some advances on her that she was not receptive to, and yeah, they had a massive falling out because of that. And so she liked him up until that point. And so she was talking about how sad it was, because up until that point she really liked the guy, but then he got more than a little aggressive with her, and then I was like, nope, no more. And then William Finley, he chimes in for the scenes where his character Roy, the unhinged dad, and it's funny listening to William Finley talk about his character, because he was reading the script and everything, and he's like, what is wrong with my character? And then eventually one of the people who was making the movie, I think, was talking to him about it. I don't remember who it was, but they were talking with him about it, and they were explaining some stuff about his character, like the exact mental problems that his character has. And so William Finley's like, okay, now I know how to play this guy now. And so his portrayal in the movie of someone who's unhinged as in his own way makes a little more sense after listening to him on the commentary track. But it's just watching the movie without the commentary track, you're like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? I mean, yeah, you're doing a good job of playing this crazy guy, but what is up with the whole eye thing? I mean, what's up with you looking for an eye that's on the ground, and even though you have both eyes? I mean, what, dude? So after listening to William Finley explain what was going on there, it's like, okay, that makes a little more sense. I mean, you're still batshit crazy, but it's a craziness that makes sense. And Kyle Richards, she's a full-grown adult in this commentary track when when the commentary track was made. And so there are several funny moments when she's looking at herself as a little girl on screen, and she's like, oh my god, look how cute I looked. And then of course she starts freaking out because she's like, where was OSHA when we needed them? Because apparently the environment she was in was physically unsafe, but they filmed her in this environment anyway, like namely like under the hotel and everything. And so even though the hotel was a set, like they actually had to construct it and everything. And so you have this little girl crawling around, running around with real rats and spiders and things like that. And so so she's like, ironically, her mom was okay with some of the stuff, but then, like when the rats were involved, that's when the mom, tried to speak up and everything. But other than that, though, she was kind of like, I mean, then of course you have this full grown, gross looking, man who's trying to kill me. And of course, I mean, she realizes, that Neville Brandt's just an actor doing his job. But she's like, from the perspective of a little girl, it's kind of like, this was terrifying for me. I actually had nightmares about it for days. And so it is funny listening to her, recount that. And it's a wonder that, there wasn't, say, like a lawsuit or anything like that from her mom or anything. So Kyle Richards, I mean, she does a good job of, reminiscing and, telling, the audience and the listener, what was going on at the time, and, how she remembers things. And of course, Craig Reardon is this was, I believe, his first movie as a makeup artist, and he's gone to do many other movies since then, but he has some good stories to tell. And I believe it was him who said that, I mean, like, because Mardi Rustam, the producer, and co-writer, he had some good behind the scenes stories as well, but he only touched on why Tobe Hooper left, or who directed instead Tobe Hooper, but he didn't exactly say who our director was. But it wasn't until Craig Reardon got into the track that's where I learned that it was the cinematographer who stepped in to direct for the scenes that Tobe Hooper didn't get around to after he butt heads and left. Because some of the people on the commentary track, they're kind of confused as to if whether Tobe Hooper was fired from the movie or he quit. But listening to, say, Mardi Rustam and Craig Reardon, I mean, you get the clear impression that Tobe Hooper quit the movie after butting heads with the producers, and which is ironic because apparently he actually got along rather well with the actors, but it's just the producers that he had the problem with. But so the other feature is My Name is Buck, and it's interview with Robert Englund. And this is, I think, one of the first times I've watched a full interview with Robert Englund, other than, say, a few clips in the past. And Robert Englund really comes across as a laid-back, amiable individual. And he talks about his humble beginnings, and how, like, originally he was wanting to be a stage actor, and he was a stage actor for a time. Like, he did some Shakespeare stuff and what have you. And so this guy has some quality training, but unfortunately, though, he came to find that theater acting was, basically a world full of backstabbing. And so, if you wanted to make a living acting, Hollywood was the way to go. And so he talks about how, I mean, once you were a regular actor in Hollywood, I mean, you definitely had to do some side jobs just to make ends meet. But once you got to play a part in a movie, he said that that made it all worthwhile. And he talks about how he had to wait until some of the movies he was in were actually in theaters before he got paid for them, and it's things like that. So it's kind of like there's a lot of stories about checks being in the mail and what have you. And one of the things I thought that was kind of heartwarming was he was talking about how one of the fond memories he has of working on Eaten Alive was getting to meet the actress. Give me a second. Carolyn Jones, who was the actress who played the whorehouse madam, Miss Hattie. And Carolyn Jones was Morticia on the Addams Family. And so, of course, Robert Englund was a huge fan of the Addams Family. And, Carolyn Jones was one of those old-time actors. And, and he got to, hang out with her and, talk with her and hear some stories from her, like some Hollywood stories and what have you. And, he said that just made it all worthwhile. And also, just, getting to work with some of the other people in the movie. And he said that he and Tobe Hooper had a pretty good working relationship as well. And it was like Tobe Hooper, was had a difficult time sometimes in trying to convey what he wanted. And so when he was talking with Robert Englund, he'd have a few words about a scene, and then Robert Englund was able to quickly put two and two together. It's like, I got it. So it was interesting, hearing his perspective on working with Tobe Hooper. But yeah, so I mean, it's a definitely a good interview, and it made me appreciate Robert Englund more. And one of the things that he jokes about is, I mean, most of the time these days, like you hear about Hollywood parties, or say like you think like, say like in the 80s or something like that, when he was Freddy Krueger, when people were going to Hollywood parties, they were wanting to see like the Brat Pack and what have you. But he's like, I wouldn't want to see Rob Lowe. I was wanting to see so and so. Like he'd be listing off some old time Hollywood actors. And he's like, that's what I grew up with. So it was cool to hear him talk about that, because even though he's older than the Brat Pack, he came to prominence, I think, with the Brat Pack, in the sense that he was his best known role was Freddy Krueger, and that was in the 80s, so, and 80s is when the Brat Pack was there, so he kind of falls in that territory. Like, he wasn't a member of the Brat Pack, but he came to prominence during the time of the Brat Pack. So I thought it was interesting that he kind of touched on that, and thought he was joking about how ironic it was in that regard. But he's like, I mean, yeah, he's always cool kids and everything, but shoot, I want to hang out with them. I want to hang out with these old people here. so yeah, Robert Englund, I mean, definitely comes across as a pretty cool dude. And if you're a fan of him, like say from Nightmare on Elm Street or what have you, I mean, it's definitely interesting to see him in this movie as this straight up slime bag. And then listening to him or watching this interview with him, you kind of come away appreciating the actual man, as opposed to just say the actor. So the other feature is The Butcher of Elmendorf, The Legend of Joe Ball, and that's where we get into the story of Joe Ball, and how his killings more or less served as an inspiration for this particular movie, or at least the horror aspect of this movie. Even though the whole notion of him feeding his victims' bodies to his pet alligators was something that was never confirmed. I mean, it's something that a lot of people like to claim was true, and basically his story was embellished over the years to where that kind of became fact, even though it wasn't necessarily fact. But one of the people that features most prominently in this documentary, I believe, was a nephew of his, and he seems like a really cool dude. I mean, he's got this cowboy hat on, and he's an old time Texas boy, and he definitely got some fond memories of some of his other family members passing on stories about Joe Ball to him. And it's one of those things that it was kind of a blessing and a curse, for him, because he'd say that sometimes he'd be meeting someone, and they get to talking, and he'd introduce himself, and when he said his last name, and this being around the part of Texas that's around Elmendorf, or in Elmendorf even, the person he's talking to would suddenly get wide-eyed, and he's like, are you related to Joe Ball? And he's like, yep, I'm one of his nephews. so you had little funny moments like that. But he said though that it's it was kind of sad though, because he's like, just because I'm related to a serial killer doesn't mean I'm a serial killer. I'm a nice guy. I'm a good guy. You don't have to be afraid of me. So yeah, it was kind of bittersweet in that regard, but yeah, it's like up until I watched this movie, and I hadn't even heard of Joe Ball, but yeah, I just thought it was a really good documentary, and it educated me on a serial killer I didn't even know about, and it made me curious to check out Elmendorf, Texas at some point. So there you go. And of course, you got theatrical trailers and a still gallery. So there you go. So yeah, Eaten Alive, 2 out of 5 stars as far as the actual movie goes, but Some very good special features, though. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And if you got any questions, comments, please drop a line. Let me know. If you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Goodbye.